My name is Jorge Gaviria. I'm the founder of Masienda, the Better Masa company. I'm here today to talk about my career in food and theory of change. I was very preoccupied with food growing up because, not in like a sob sort of way, but like I didn't really know where my next meal was going to come from. My dad wasn't really a great cook, and I'm like, cool, I'll just make something for myself. And so I really became fixated on the amount of pleasure that I got from eating and preparing food for myself. And this becomes like my whole driving force in life without even knowing it. In fact, I realized after a while I was going to go to law school, and I was like, why am I going to go to law school? Like, I love food. I should be thinking about food. And also, I want to become really self-sufficient in food. I want to learn how to cook. Why should anyone else be in control of that major lever of happiness other than myself? I end up at an Italian restaurant. It was very farm-to-table driven. I was like, this is really fun, right? I'm getting paid to do something I love to do. And I start to kind of climb up this pyramid a little bit. And I start to kind of realize that I'm, without knowing it, a part of this broader kind of industry subculture that I didn't even know I wanted to be a part of. And I started to feel this enormous sense of belonging for the first time I'd ever had in my entire life. I knew I wanted to be in food, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I needed some direction, and I ended up with a restaurant called Blue Hill at Stone Barns. The farming that they're trying to demonstrate there is sort of exactly how this is all possible, right? Like, if you are really being intentional about agriculture and soil and animal husbandry, all of these things conspire to make things impossibly delicious. And I was like, how can I start to kind of like channel this into foods that I wanted to see represented on this fence? And I grew up in a Latin community. My mom was born in Mexico, my dad was born in Cuba. So I started to think, is there a way, like, if the same approach that made these vegetables possible, is there a way to kind of make the best tortilla I've ever had in my life possible? I was like, man, corn. Like, corn is such a simple staple that you find all around the world. It is the connective tissue across Latin culture. It really defined the main caloric intake I had growing up. Most people think of corn as like genetically modified. That's typically the first thing that comes to mind, or Monsanto, or a lot of bad things, but not really delicious things like a vegetable on a fence. Like purity, like just the best flavor possible. So I became really consumed with corn. Culture starts at the top. It starts with the elites, and it sort of trickles down throughout culture to become a mass idea or concept or product. And Dan Barber, for better or worse, the guy had created an enormous amount of cultural capital, and a lot of the things that I was seeing on grocery shelves at that time were actually informed by the stuff that was happening in his kitchens. This is how it all happened. I saw this man coming up with these ideas with his team in a kitchen, and then years later, this trickling down to either a consumer packaged good, so that means like some kind of product you can buy on a shelf, or at a really massively distributed restaurant. And I thought, man, this is incredible. The key here is to work with high-end chefs. If I want to start something in food, work with these high-end chefs to make something, create a name for it, and then channel that into a consumer packaged good that I can launch years later. Nixtamalization is a very complicated sounding word that has indigenous etymology behind it. Basically, you take an alkaline solution like ash or calcium hydroxide, you cook corn in this water plus cal solution, and it transforms. You take what is basically an empty calorie, and it becomes an incredibly nutrient-dense, incredibly flavorful superfood. What's amazing is that had the indigenous foodway not figured this out, it would have led to malnutrition, and basically that's what happened to Europeans when they took it from Mexico and Mesoamerica to Europe. In the United States, we actually grow the most amount of corn in the world, but it ends up in lots of things that have nothing to do with food. So even though it was and is the most sacrosanct food in Mexican staples, Mesoamerica at large, and now increasingly Latin America. In the US, we use it for cattle feed and shoe polish and wall plaster and kind of gross things that you don't think of that aren't super appetizing. Today, kind of one of the most famous corn brands, as it were, is Masa. Masa is a dehydrated masa. So masa is corn dough. It's then dried and put into a powder, basically, so it's shelf stable, and you just add water to it, and it's instant masa, which makes tortillas, tamales, pupusas, arepas, all sorts of great stuff. And intellectually, this was it. I was like, this is a super humble staple. Gonna disrupt this supply chain. We're gonna make it attached to something really good. It's gonna taste really good. Everyone's gonna win. It's gonna be the best case scenario. 6 years since Masienda had started, we were really ready to start exploring what the consumer opportunities were. We felt like we'd hit a critical mass on education. And we launched a line of Masa, which has done incredibly well. The Better Masa Company becomes kind of like our tagline here. We finally have a product that can compete with Masienda, that is easy to use. You just add water. It's supporting an incredible amount of about 2,000 smallholder farmers that we work with today, up from 12 the first year, across about 30,000 acres of regenerative farming, traditional farming. And it's the fastest growing Masa company in the country. Masa is about I don't know, depending on what you look at, a $12 billion market in the US. It's not nothing. And so I love that we've been able to kind of approach a category built from the ground up with an impeccable supply chain, an amazing amount of impact, but also flavor and story to go along with that. The intersection of curiosity and time always leads to good things. I think for me to be able to work in something that really harnesses my creativity and makes me feel like the best version of myself every day, that is the goal. And you kind of have a meandering journey to get there. There is no arrival really, but like this is as close as I've ever felt. The more education there is about kind of what we do and the connectedness that we have to supply chains like corn for Masa, the more we start to really approach active consumption instead of passive consumption. The more we start to really take active ownership in that entire value chain and make better decisions that impact us from a wellness perspective, from a flavor perspective, and just overall good economics and wellness for the world.